Barakim Habarim. Welcome to Messianic Moment Ministries. I'm Stephen Bruck. You know who you are. Today's the ninth day of January 2024. Remember, 24. Well, God never changes, but his focus can. Now, we all know, God is the same today, yesterday, and tomorrow. But did you know that there are times when God's focus on how he wants us to recognize and refer to him does change? Let's see some examples. In Exodus 20, when God gave Moses the Ten Commandments, the very first one says, and this is from the Complete Jewish Bible, I am Adonai your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the abode of slavery. Later on in that chapter, in the fourth commandment, God said that we must honor the Sabbath because he worked for 6 days, then rested. Time out for a second. For the record, Christianity has changed the first commandment, removing the reference to Egypt in order to remove any trace of their Jewish roots. Then they added the first part of the second commandment, which refers to idol making. So if you look that up on the internet and you see that I am the Lord your God, you shall have no other gods before me, that's a Christian revision of what God actually said. And now, later on in the Tanakh, we see that God changes the focus of each of these two commandments. Now, the Shabbat is no longer to be honored because God rested, but because he provided rest for the people. See, in Deuteronomy 5, when Moses reviews the Big Ten with the people, the fourth commandment now ends up with this. You ought to remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and Adonai your God brought you out from there with a strong hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, Adonai your God has ordered you to keep the day of Shabbat. And the first commandment also has its focus changed, but that's many years later. When God has Jeremiah give this prophecy, this is Jeremiah 23, 7 through 8, again, Complete Jewish Bible. Therefore, says Adonai, the day will come when people no longer swear, as Adonai lives, who brought the people of Israel out of the land of Egypt, but as Adonai lives, who brought the descendants of the house of Israel up from the land to the north and from all the countries where I drove them. Then they will live in their own land. So the first commandment doesn't change, but the focus of who God is in relation to the children of Israel has changed. The slavery in Egypt now takes second place to the exile in Babylon. So why would God change his focus on these two highly important commands from him? Of course, I can't speak for God, but I believe that he wanted to update these commands to meet the current situation. When Moses reviewed the Big Ten, this is before he went to his death, and he wanted to remind the people that the Shabbat was a day of rest, not just because God rested, but now that they were going to be pretty much on their own, to rest because God provided that day for them. In other words, this wasn't something for them to do just because God did, but because God gave it to them. Shabbat isn't just a day to copy God, it is a gift from God. And in that culture, to refuse a gift was a very bad thing to do. It's almost seen as an insult to the giver. You certainly don't want to insult God. And as for the change in focus, God had Jeremiah tell the people about, considering how poor their memory was, exemplified by their constant sinning. I believe in this case, God was telling them that the exile in Babylon would take precedence over their slavery in Egypt because Egypt, that wasn't their fault, but Babylon was. Their tsuris in Egypt was the result of a pharaoh's sin against them. But their exile to Babylon, with the destruction of the temple and ruination of the land, well, that's the direct result of their sin. The change in focus is to cause the people to not remember how God took us from Egypt, but that he took us out of Babylon after we had paid the price for our sins. Now, both ways, there's the underlying message that God will rescue his people, whether they have been sinned against or are suffering as a result of their own sins. But going forward from that point, let's remind them of what happened to them because of their sinfulness. Now, there haven't been any prophets around really since the time of Ezra, unless, of course, you're Mormon. You would believe differently. So we haven't had any changes in focus, unless you want to count the changes that men have made, and women too, when creating their own religion, with their own rules, tenets, rites, and celebrations. That is why I constantly remind you that God has no religion. Religion is the main reason people have been led away from God. You know what? Maybe I've been blaming people for religion when, considering how it has misled so many away from God's instructions, maybe the real author of religion is Hasatan. What do you think? In the meantime, thank you for being here, and please don't hesitate to comment. That's it for today. So, Lihitrot, and Baruch Hashem.